So a good afternoon, morning, evening to those of you that are joining us. My name is Kevin Mulhall. I am a Senior Technical Program Manager for the Microsoft Partnership here at TechSoup. In today's webinar session series titled The Art of the Possible, Building Data Strategy for Greater Mission Impact, we are joined by our partners from Tech Impact to discuss what I think, and maybe I'm a bit biased, is an absolutely awesome array of solutions through the Azure program, particularly those within the data space. As many of you probably know, we've moved on in part from the feelings and emotions of charitable work to really trying to understand and being able to articulate the impact that we're having on the communities we serve through a data lens. And from that end, again, we're joined by Tech Impact and three fabulous panelists on their team. I'm going to go ahead here and I'll just actually start sharing, Ryan.
Sounds great. Oh. Fun fact, Kevin, I thought I was sharing. My fault.
It's okay. I was kind of looking at you and I'm like, wait a minute, is he sharing? I'm not really sure, but I'll just go ahead and grab that from here. You guys can all see my screen. Okay, thumbs up. Okay, great. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin here. As mentioned to those that were joining us beforehand, this session is being recorded. If you perhaps are not comfortable participating in that, it's certainly understandable. We will be sharing this recording in the coming days along with a slide deck material. So you can, of course, again, choose to turn on or turn off your video. It was set off by default. Microphones are enabled, but we are going to keep those on mute until we reach the portion of Q&A at the end. You're welcome to kind of step up to the virtual podium if you will or desire to. So during the live session, the chat for questions that you have, if you could please, because Q&A is enabled, that's obviously the preferred method, but understanding that sometimes chat's a lot easier to use. If you're going to ask a question, please, if you could, just put the letter Q, semicolon, and then ask away. This will make it easier for us to directly address the questions in there. I'm going to ask, it's not on this slide, but if you see a question that you want asked, also want asked and answered, put a plus sign. It's one of the icon selections that you can choose. This way we can kind of get a gauge of also how important a question is. While all questions are important, ones that multiple people have, well, we obviously want to take into special consideration. As I mentioned, by default, microphones are going to be muted until we get to the Q&A session. Please, if you can, just try to be mindful of that, especially if you're in a noisy area, as it will make the recording. And as exciting as it is to hear music, especially music that I like, in the background, we want to try to be respectful to those in attendance as well as our panelists. There is a raise hand option for those that are familiar or maybe even unfamiliar with it in Teams. You're welcome to use that when we head over to the Q&A session. We could simply pick randomly from there. If we're a little bit shy in terms of an audience, we'll be happy to just, again, using that Q in front of your chat or putting it to the Q&A section, we'll be happy to just pull questions from there. And then obviously your display name is viewable during the live session. That does not carry over into the recording, but it is viewable on our end. So after the live session, this is part 1 of 2, where we want to encourage you to join us for both parts. The next part on session of this is October the 14th. They're both great sessions, and being a part of both of them, I think, really kind of solidifies an organization and an individual's ability to kind of fully wrap their head around what can be, I don't want to say what is, but rather what can be a rather difficult topic. So with that, I'm going to move it over to Ryan.
Awesome. And we can still see the screen with the Tech Impact mission on it. I successfully managed to share my screen this time around. Hopefully that's the biggest technical difficulty we have today. But thank you all so much for joining us today. Kevin, thanks for the great introduction as well. I'll more formally introduce myself in a second, but I'm really excited that our team could be here from Tech Impact to talk about how to utilize data and specifically how to think about building a data strategy. If you're not familiar with Tech Impact, we are a nonprofit that serves other nonprofits. We're very proud to be partners with TechSoup in a lot of different ways over the course of many different years. And we do a few key things. Working backwards, one thing that we're really proud of is that we are a provider of tech career development programs. We're a workforce development provider ourselves, particularly helping 18 to 26-year-old opportunity youth get their foot into the door with tech from a job and into a career. We love giving educational resources and webinars, and so we're particularly happy to be here today to help with that, and also do things like running boot camps for nonprofits to help them understand their data or other components of their work. But really, the part that our team represents is part of our tech services solutions. We do that in a lot of different ways, from managed services up to the work that my team does, where we are focused entirely on data for social good, helping nonprofits understand what data they have available to them, how to store it the right way, and ultimately how to use that for data-driven decision making. And that's really what today's conversation is about. It's how can you equip your nonprofits with the skills that you need in order to make that happen. So in terms of some more formal introductions, I'm Ryan Harrington. I lead our data lab team. My background is as a data scientist, and have been really excited to bring that work of data science from for-profit companies who really led the way in doing a lot of this work and into the nonprofit and social good space to make sure that our communities are optimizing their work as best as possible to serve as many constituents in the best way they possibly can. And I'll introduce my colleagues. Darnesh, can I turn it over to you for a quick intro, and then Matt?
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everybody. My name is Darnesh Prakash, and I'm the lead data engineer at Tech Impact. I specialize in building data pipelines and data infrastructure that powers business intelligence, analytics, and machine learning applications. I'm passionate about leveraging modern cloud platforms like Microsoft Azure, Fabric, to enable data-driven decision making. I will turn it over to Matt.
Thanks. My name is Matt St. Cyr. I'm an application developer at Tech Impact. I specialize in Microsoft services, CRM, data and application integrations, customized automation. And I absolutely love working with nonprofits and finding out all the ways that we can help them with data and technology.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, thank you to the two of you. Diving right into an agenda, the whole goal of today is really to spend time talking about the art of the possible and really understanding from a data perspective, what is it that you can even do? Because it's really difficult to actually dream about how you can improve your work if you don't actually have a sense of what you can do in the first place. So from that perspective, that drives our agenda. We're going to spend a little bit of time up front just talking about why that actually matters for nonprofit organizations. We certainly previewed that a second ago. We'll switch into thinking about what's possible and artificial intelligence from there, giving you an understanding of what that work actually looks like, and then wrap up by talking about what you need to be doing to enable that work at your organization. And that flows really well, as Kevin mentioned, into the part 2 of this webinar series, which we'll be talking about next week, which dives way deeper into some of the things that you need to be thinking about at your organization to make this possible for yourself. So next week answers the question of, how do we make the art of the possible in the first place? Throughout today as well, I'll be giving you a lot of the content, and then I'll be passing it over to Darnesh and Matt, who are going to be handling some of the demos of some of these different tools that we'll talk about momentarily. So you'll get to see them as they talk through some use cases in a much more specific way. But why does this matter? Why does a data strategy matter for your organization when, frankly, you have a lot of other things going on and a lot of really pressing issues? And the answer is exactly because of that, actually. I would break it down into 4 key reasons why a data strategy is going to be really, really important for your nonprofit organization to be thinking about. The first and foremost one is that data is an optimizing force. It gives you the tools that you need when you have limited resources, whatever that means for you, to pick and choose where to make bets. How do you optimize those resources in a way that's going to allow you to do your work more effectively. Data is also a trust building tool. It's a way to talk with the constituents that you serve, the communities that you serve, the funders that you partner with, or whoever else your stakeholders might be to be able to say, hey, here's how we're performing today. And you should believe that because we feel really confident about our data stack. It gives you the tools you need to build trust over time. It lets you improve the decision-making that you have on hand. And certainly you might think of that as at an executive level, but data-driven decision-making is something that should be at the core across your whole organization, something that's embedded into all the decisions that you're making. But you can't have data-driven decision-making if you don't have the tools in front of you to make that possible in the first place. And all of those things together give you the capacity to advance your mission in a way that's going to be meaningful to you, whatever that might look like. I imagine that many of you are coming into this conversation and you have tools like a theory of change or a logic model that you're building upon in order to do your work more effectively, so you understand what great looks like. And data is a tool that helps you understand where you are in that process and how you can get even better. Data is kind of the core by which you can understand what good looks like and what great could look like from there. There's a lot of Microsoft tools that help enable this. And I don't expect any of you to walk away from these next couple of webinars being absolute expert on what these tools are, but I think it's really helpful to get an understanding of what those could look like for you and how you might deploy them so that you can dream more effectively than you might be able to today. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about 4 particular tools, though it's worth calling out there are many, many more than that are at your disposal in the Microsoft ecosystem. So we'll be spending time today specifically talking about Microsoft Fabric and Azure AI Foundry. Those are tools that help support this idea of the art of the possible. Microsoft Fabric, particularly from a machine learning perspective, and we'll talk more about that. And Azure AI Foundry, it's in the name, helping you think more about some of the AI capacity that you might have. The other tools that we'll look at, Synapse and Purview, help a little bit more in terms of helping you build what you want, help to make the possible possible. Fabric also could be included in that as well. And so that gives you a good sense of what we might be thinking about here. So let's actually talk about some of this content now. What even is possible in the first place? You can't dream about what you want to do if you can't answer that question to start with. And so the way I think about that is what types of analyses are you even able to perform? We're going to give you an abridged version of this. The answer is there's way more nuance and way more possibilities here than we could fit into a 90-minute session. But we can at least give you some starting points that you can work from as you think about how this could impact your work. And you'll see throughout the course of today that we're going to use one particular line of sight, something that's common to most organizations, which is around fundraising. And we're going to talk through some different types of analyses, particularly as it relates to fundraising, that you can think about. But of course, these techniques apply to many different types of domains. It's a really useful working exercise to go from. So I think of 4 key types of analyses at a really high level that you could think through. And we're going to start from some of the simplest and work our way up to some more complex ones. You'll probably feel familiar with some of the simplest ones and a little bit less familiar with the more complex ones. And so to start with, descriptive analytics. So descriptive analytics is exactly what it sounds like. This is the type of data that describes what has been happening in the past. Descriptive, describe. So what have we done in the past? These are the simple types of KPIs that you might be familiar with. Think about like your 8th grade math, mean, median, mode, and range. How have things changed over time? Those types of data points, that type of information, and that's really, really important. Descriptive analytics is often what's going to be driving your understanding of what happened in the past, and that's going to let you use that information to make decisions about what should happen in the future. You need that to be informed about your work overall. And if you don't feel good about your data, you're not going to be able to do that very effectively. So with that in mind, some really simple examples of this, using this idea of a fundraising example, I would want to think about an organization who might want to track some of these metrics, things like past donation history, so that they have a clear understanding of from fiscal year 21 through fiscal year 24, here's our year-over-year number of donations or amount of donations that we received. A part of this organization's fundraising world is they might have events that they are tracking attendance with. And so them having a good sense of the individuals in their funder community attending those events could be a really important KPI for them to gauge. And so just simply like tracking that over time and having a clear understanding would be really valuable. Similarly, you could imagine that they have email campaigns. And so being able to track engagement and understanding that, for example, the click-through rate, how likely is it that someone, or it's not how likely, what is the specific rate that people clicked on links in an email to get to whatever a call to action would look like. And they might also want to have an understanding of income data. It's like what gets them information about who the average donor is and what their income looks like. And you could imagine an organization would have way more KPIs or pieces of data that they would want to track in line with that. But those are really good examples of what descriptive data looks like. It's pretty simple stuff, but you're likely actually capturing a lot of those things already. It starts to get more complex as we move up the chain. So from descriptive, we go to diagnostic. Diagnostic analytics help us to understand what we've seen in the past. It answers, why have we seen past results? And this starts to get into the realm of things like correlations or some basic regression type of models that help give us an understanding of what those things might actually look like. So if we go ahead and revisit those KPIs to track metrics, you might think of some key questions here. I want you to think around the questions that you would actually ask. So in terms of past donation history, while we had what those past values are, a question you might want to ask is, does the amount an individual gave last year impact whether they give this year? So you're now making a relationship and trying to figure out an understanding between those things. Event attendance. Do the number of events an individual attended last year impact whether they give this year? So same type of idea. It's building towards this idea of trying to understand what leads to someone actually giving. Does the average click-through rate of an individual over the past year impact whether they give this year? Does the income level of the individual impact whether they give this year? So each of those things, we're trying to build a relationship between two different variables. In this case, whether or not, like whatever the value is, past donation history, event attendance, engagement, and income, with whether the person gave this past year, so that we could understand that story a little bit more effectively. So diagnostic analytics is that next step up. And these are really important questions that your organization could start asking itself today. And they normally involve multiple variables that you're looking at in conjunction with each other. The next step is to make predictions. So descriptive tells us what happened in the past. Diagnostic tells us tells us about relationships between things so we can understand what happened in the past. And now predictive is saying, great, I understand that, but what's going to happen in the future? And this is really powerful because it lets you plan more effectively. This is all probabilistic, so there's no way to know for sure what will happen in the future, and that's something that you have to plan around, but it can give you a decent sense of what might occur so that you can plan a little bit more effectively, or so that you could automate a decision, or many, many other things. Predictive analytics actually breaks down into a few major categories that are worth thinking about, and I'm going to talk about each one of those in turn. So a couple of things. One piece of language you should be familiar with is the idea of something called supervised learning versus unsupervised learning. All that means, supervised learning, is just when I have historical labeled data, I know what the outcomes look like already. So I'm going to go because I know what the outcomes look like already, I can go tell an algorithm to go say, all right, I have all these variables that contribute to whether or not someone, the profile of the person, and I also know whether or not they gave in the past year. I want you to go find that pattern for me. On the flip side, something like unsupervised data, you don't know that labeled outcome. I don't know whether they gave or not. And so instead I might say, could you find patterns of funders who look similar to each other? And we'll talk through a couple of specific examples of that in a second. Each of these categories are broken down into some other questions. And these are the questions that I really want you to think about. So first is this idea of regression. Regression is a technique that asks if I can predict a numerical value. So my values would be something from like 0 to 1 million, or whatever the bound of the particular solution that I'm thinking about is. So zeroing in on this same data set, remember I have past donation history, I have event attendance, I have engagement with emails, I have income data. Well, the question I'd want to ask is, can I predict how much an individual donor is going to give this year? So I want to use all this past historical data that I have, use them all together, and I'm going to use that information to say, all right, John Smith is going to give $1,000. And I think that's pretty likely because of all these different pieces of information. And that could be really valuable for the planning function that my team might need to do in order to understand what our budget will look like for the next year. Another type of supervised learning you might think about is something called classification. And this can actually look pretty similar in terms of the type of data sets you might use, but it's asking a slightly different question. It's now saying, can I predict the likelihood? So my outcome, instead of being some number, is going to be a percentage. So something bounded between 0% and 100%. It can't be any other number. And so I'd be saying, what's the likelihood that John Smith will give? So I might use all the same data, that past donation history, the event attendance data, the engagement with emails, the income, except my label this time is for the past year, did the person give or not? So my historical data would say yes or no, but when I'm predicting in the future, I'd be assigning people a percentage. So John Smith is 100%, but Susie is 23% or whatever else it might be. Just to give you if you're a more visual person, you need to see what something like that could look like. Let's pretend that this is what your labeled data actually looks like for, Mickey Mouse, Bugs Bunny, Patrick Star, Bruce Wayne, Peter Parker. So I can see that last year they gave different amounts of money. So on the low end, Patrick Star gave $25, but Bruce Wayne's got some money. He gave $1,000. You can see how much they participated in events. Bugs Bunny went to a whole bunch, but Mickey Mouse and Bruce Wayne, they're both pretty busy, and so they didn't make it to as many things. You can see that they have different click-through rates. So Peter Parker engaged a lot with emails, but on the flip side, Bruce Wayne kind of never opened any of them. But I know what their income looks like as well. Bruce Wayne makes a lot of it, and Patrick Star and Peter Parker don't make quite so much. And I can see that last year, Mickey Mouse gave some money, and Patrick Star gave some money, and Peter Parker gave some money, but Bugs and Bruce didn't. So then the question becomes, all right, I have these two new people, Ash Ketchum and Velma Dinkley. Here's the profiles of what they look like, and I'm trying to figure out, will they give or not? What's the likelihood? And now my output for them, I'm going to use all this historical data for Mickey Mouse and Peter Parker. But imagine I've got thousands of records here. I don't just have 5 records. And I'm going to make a prediction for Ash, and I'm going to make a prediction for Velma based upon what I'm seeing from their data. And maybe it's that Ash is pretty likely to donate and Velma is less likely to donate. So that's those are supervised learning tasks. I have this historical data. I have the weather, the label, what happened in the past, and I'm going to use that to make a prediction about the future or about a new customer or something along those lines. Unsupervised learning doesn't have that luxury. We don't have the label. We don't actually know what that looks like. It can still be really valuable data, but it's going to look a little bit different in practice. So clustering is an exercise of figuring out if you can find common groupings amongst the different people that you're serving. So for example, once again, I have all this same information, past donation history, event attendance, engagement with emails, but we might consider something like frequency of giving as well. My goal here is to see if I can find meaningful donor groups that would help me personalize my outreach. Now, when I'm using the algorithm, I don't know what those groupings are going to look like. The algorithm is going to tell me those things, and it's not going to give me convenient labels for what that is. It would make the groupings, and then my job as the analyst would be to say, oh, this grouping indicates this type of thing. So when I go to the next slide, I'm going to show you some groupings. The algorithm wouldn't tell you those. You'd have to discover that that's what it means. But typically, it's helpful to put a convenient label on it to understand what's happening. So you might find when you're segmenting your donors, you've got a group of loyal supporters, another group of big spenders, another group that are new and curious, and another group that are at risk, people that they might fall off in terms of their giving. So if we go look at that unlabeled data, right, I don't have an extra column in here telling me what group they're in. I'm going to ask the algorithm across these 7 folks, and once again, you'd have way more than just 7, to go place them into buckets. And it would be my job to then go label them afterwards. And here's what it could look like. We might see that, not surprisingly, Mickey Mouse and Bruce Wayne are big spenders. They make more income than others, and they give more money than others. They don't participate in quite the same way. They're not going to events. So I'd call them big spenders, and I would want to treat them a different way. We have Bugs Bunny and Ash Ketchum, who they have a slightly different pattern. They're loyal supporters. They're coming to events. They're giving some money, but I'd probably want to engage them differently. Peter Parker and Velma Dinkley are new and curious. They haven't gone to quite as much stuff. They're trying to understand what they might want to do with the organization. And then Patrick Star is at risk. He doesn't come to a lot of stuff. He doesn't give a lot of money. We might want to figure out what that is and how to handle him. So having those labels could automate how you want to go engage with each of those groups and have a different plan for how to optimize your fundraising efforts based upon that. And this might be anecdotal information your team already has, but having the data and using an algorithm to help you do this helps solidify what that looks like. And the last one I want to highlight here is the idea of association. It fundamentally asks the question of what goes together. So the easy example of this is also called shopping cart analysis. If I were to tell you, like, hey, what goes with peanut butter? What do you buy with peanut butter? You would tell me jelly or bread. If I were to tell you eggs, you might tell me milk, right? These common types of shopping cart items that all work with each other. That's the idea of association. And it's, can we find those patterns in an automatic way? So I might want to discover donor behavior patterns that exist by looking at my data. Once again, because if I understand those patterns, I can then go use that to optimize my decision-making in some way. So for example, if I understand like donors who attend volunteer events, those same donors might also donate within 7 days of attending those volunteer events. Association mining is going to help me find and identify those types of patterns. Or similarly, I might find the pattern that donors who respond to year-end emails are also likely to give at Giving Tuesday. And so those patterns will emerge, and you'll find a bunch, like a long tail of what those are, some of which might be obvious, some of which might be things that you can use to plan really effectively. All of those things are really valuable types of predictive analytics. And there's a long tail of other types of predictive analytics techniques you might think about, but just thinking about those kind of key categories, regression, classification, clustering, and association mining is going to let you discover some possibilities inside of your own organization. The last one I want to highlight here is prescriptive analytics. And this now asks the question of, well, how should we take action upon this? And more importantly, could you automate the actions that you're taking? So once I make the prediction, can I be prescriptive with what the output for this could look like? So here's an example of what you might think about in terms of that. So if I want to say, like, how does data help us take action? A prescriptive example you might look at is understanding the donor history and engagement with organizations, letting that drive the best time and method to reach out. It might also drive how much to, like a suggestion for how much to ask for. And all that data put with each other could tell you, hey, send Sarah an email on Giving Tuesday asking for $100, because you were able to use data to drive that decision so that you could optimize how much you're asking for and when you are asking for it. So it's connecting the analytics to the output of what you're actually doing and trying to automate that process in between. It's a really powerful technique. Now, with that said, I want to switch over to Darnesh, who's going to help us think about how to put that into practice. The first demo that we're going to talk about here is from Microsoft Fabric, which is a phenomenal tool put out by Microsoft that tries to make it much easier for individuals to use machine learning and forecasting as part of their work, and a whole bunch of other things besides that. We're going to keep this idea going of thinking about fundraising, and Darnesh is going to walk you through an example there. So Darnesh, take it from here.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Darnesh. and I'm going to show a quick demo on Microsoft Fabric's ML and forecasting capabilities. I'm really excited to introduce you all to Microsoft Fabric. Over the past few years, Fabric has quickly become one of the most talked about tools in the data space, mainly because it makes working with data much easier and more accessible. Think of Fabric as a one-stop solution for everything related to your organization's data. Instead of juggling between multiple systems, one for storing data, one for analyzing it, and yet another for creating reports, Fabric helps you to bring all those pieces together in a single seamless platform. The best part is it is designed to be user-friendly. You don't have to be a technical expert to benefit from it. Fabric helps organizations like yours to connect data from different sources, organize it in one place, and turn it into clear insights so that you can make better decisions. Today, we'll focus more specifically on Fabric's machine learning capabilities. Uh, let's walk through a real-world example to see how Microsoft Fabric can help. Imagine you are a nonprofit leader responsible for planning fundraising campaigns. Part of your job is to set realistic donation targets and make sure your campaigns are successful. One of the questions that you face is like, how much funding are we likely to raise in the future? Uh, that's where forecasting comes in. Forecasting is a type of predictive analytics that uses past data to estimate what will happen in the future. Forecasting is like a subcategory of regression, the type of predictive analytics task that Ryan talked about previously. Um, so the first step is we need to make sure we have the right data. For the purpose of the demo, we have curated a sample data set for the campaigns. As you could see, it's in a SQL table and it has campaigns. It has 3 different campaigns: annual fund, um, and then education drive and health and wellness. So those are the 3 high-level campaigns. And we have the data over a decade from 2014 to 2024. And there are some other key set of informations like the email sent, CTR, and social media and visits and all those numbers. And the final outcome that we are looking for is the donation amount. So the donation amount is kind of aggregated for every month for every campaign that we saw. So now that we have the clean data, we can move to the Fabric's Auto ML feature. So Fabric has this cool tool for configuring the Auto ML model. It is a wizard that helps you to configure the ML model setup. So the first step is to choose the data. So we are selecting the data that we have cleaned. So it basically connects to the SQL table, and the type of ML task that we are interested in is forecasting. And it offers like a couple of modes: quick, prototype, and best fit, for the sake of quick time. So we are choosing the quick prototype. And it asks other set some questions like, what is the prediction column that you are looking at? And in this scenario, we are looking at predicting the donation amount. And what's the time period that you are uh, looking to make the prediction? So I'm choosing like 18 months. And once you finalize all the details, it creates a notebook for the machine learning model. So I'll quickly show you the notebook. Yeah, so this is the notebook that it auto creates. So it creates basically those 5 steps: loading the data, generating the features, and it uses AutoML to find the best model. And finally, once it has the best model, it saves it and then generates prediction. Those are the high level steps. And as you could see, all the code and all those pieces are auto generated for you. You don't have to make any changes unless you want to tweak the model. And here you could see the experiments it ran. So the child 0, 1, 2, 3, all those are different experiments. So for forecasting, it takes a bunch of ML models like XGBoost, Light GBM, and all those. and it does like different hyperparameter tuning and different model fine tuning, and it validates each model and gives you the best fit model it thinks for this particular data set. And once it has the best model, it saves the model and then runs predictions for the next 18 months. The predictions are then saved to the SQL table. Once you have those results, we can use Power BI to visualize the generated output. Here is like a time series graph in Power BI. So the blue line that you see is the past data that we had from 2014 to 2024. We have the donation amount for the last decade, and this is broken down by the 3 campaigns. And the black line that you see is the forecasted prediction output for the future, the next 18 months. And the gray shaded region is the confidence interval. The confidence interval has the upper bound and lower bound. So when it comes to forecasting, uh, the outputs are all probabilistic. So that doesn't mean that the specific number is guaranteed, but it's like the highest likelihood. So it gives like a confidence interval range, so where it can fall. So we have those ranges there. And you can switch between the different campaigns and see those particular campaigns forecasted and the past results. So yeah, Microsoft Fabric is really powerful. So when you join us for the next webinar next week, we'll talk more on the data infrastructure side of things, like the cleaning, the data aggregation, and all those pieces. So that's all I have. I will pass it back to Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Darnesh. And I really appreciate the comment in the chat from Hannah of, we're giving some solid fundraising examples here, but I want to call out that this all applies across the spectrum of what nonprofits might think about doing. So having a good understanding of the metrics, and Matt just left a great comment in there that align to your social impact, that's going to be very specific to your organization's needs, but would really cover this spec of programmatic things you could do. It also is great for other operations types of work. Just an example of that, a project that's been near and dear to our team's heart over the last couple of years. Our team, I think for the last 2 years exactly, has been working with a partner that provides counseling services. And in particular, they do opiate counseling services as one of those counseling lines that they're working on. And they came to us with the problem of, would it be possible for us to predict the likelihood of people coming into this program to actually complete the program? So that's a really good example of a classification model. We're trying to predict whether or not the individual would actually make it through. And we have to set some definitions there. So in this case, make it through means make it through 120 days of counseling. But it's a perfect example of a classification model being used for something outside of the realm of fundraising. It can really be used, any of these techniques can be really used across a wide array of functions within your organization. And really, as long as you can understand those core questions, predicting a number, predicting a likelihood, grouping, association, you can use that to riff off these ideas for yourself, or perhaps you need a partner to help you do that who might be more familiar with the concepts. Now, there's one really important possible thing that we've talked about that we have not addressed at all, which is generative AI. Now, certainly the hot topic right now in the world is AI. And really, when people say AI, today what they actually mean is generative AI. And that, of course, are your tools like Copilot and the other tools similar to it that are out in the world right now. Your organization is more than likely using some of them, whether or not you know it and condone it. But people in your organization are definitely thinking about those things. And having a good understanding of what generative AI actually is really helpful. And understanding some of the things you can do with generative AI in the first place is even more helpful for you. When I think of generative AI, I think about a few core components of it that separate the modern version of AI from some of the types of analytics that we talked about earlier. In fact, that definition has changed over time. There was a time not long ago, a decade ago, where if I were talking about predictive analytics or prescriptive analytics, that we would have referred to those things as AI. But the launch of ChatGPT in particular, and now with the rise of tools like Copilot, that's really changed for people in terms of how they think about it. There are 4 key components that I think of that differentiate what generative AI is, what a tool like Copilot provides in comparison to some of those past tools. The first and foremost thing to think about is this idea of internet scale data. All the models that I was talking about previously, they're using relatively small amounts of data, though it can still feel big, but it's nothing compared to the scale of the internet. And one of the special sauces that people figured out when they were building out tools like Copilot is that if we pump internet scale data, so thousands and thousands of terabytes, petabytes even of data into some of these models, that some really interesting things happen in terms of their capacity to provide value to the world. Of course, internet scale data comes with some pros and cons. The internet's a scary place, and so therefore we have to be thoughtful about what actually goes into that soup of data that drives a tool like Copilot. But there's a lot of ways and a lot of people thinking about that quite a bit. Besides that, there's this idea of content creation. We see that from large language models all the time. They don't just make a prediction. They're not just giving you a specific number. They're giving you documents and images. And that leads to that various modalities concept. There isn't just one pure output. There's a lot of different types of outputs. And those outputs can have a level of variability and creativity on top of them as well. In fact, you can change how creative your output is by changing something called temperature. And that can either make something feel much more consistent in terms of what the output looks like, or it can increase the diversity of what your outputs can look like. And all of us have used these tools. I'm going to make an assumption here, but I feel pretty strong in saying that all of us have used these tools at some point. And we've probably used them for day-to-day productivity tasks. I, for example, am a big fan of using Copilot to help me write a first draft. On the other side, my wife is a big fan of using it to refine language. So for example, she's the classic, help me make sure that this email reads correctly, maybe make it less passive aggressive than I intend it to be. You might use it to summarize documents as an ideation partner. You might use it as a tool to help you extract data. The list goes on and on and on. But I think having a strong background and understanding of how you can use those tools a little bit more effectively and push them even further can be valuable as you think about what's actually possible to do. So for example, I'm just going to start simple. And I imagine this is where most of you are. You are probably using a free or a paid large language model tool. And sticking within the Microsoft universe, that means Copilot. If you're paying for that inside of Microsoft, maybe as part of your team, that means that you're paying $25.50 per month. I believe it has to be paid annually with the nonprofit discount. And that's going to do some really amazing things for you. It's going to let you get access to those productivity tools to do this work more effectively. You're probably all somewhat familiar with this. If you're paying for the tool, it's also going to give the tool access to your documents, and it's going to keep those things safe for you. So it's going to keep it inside of your environment. So you have to worry a little bit less about those things, but it will react to the specific documents that you're using internally. But a question that we come along pretty frequently, a problem that you might encounter, is sometimes you need those outputs of your AI to reference accurate, up-to-date information. That can be really problematic. We talked a little bit about training earlier. AIs are only as powerful as the up-to-date information that they've been trained on. So a classic example of this is if you were to go ask a year ago, like, who's the president of the United States? It might not actually be correct because the model could have been trained before you asked the question. And so that could potentially be a challenge that you have to think through. Well, there's a solution for this. It's something called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. And by integrating these techniques into the work that you're doing, you give yourself the capacity to reference more up-to-date information, particularly about the work that you're doing. So let's say that you wanted to build some kind of a tool internally that's going to be able to reference your funder information in an easier way. You would connect it via something called RAG to the large language model to get an output. So here's what typically this would look like. Here's the typical prompting outline, rather. So you all are familiar. If you're going to use Copilot, you type in a prompt. The prompt then goes to the model. I'm using a set of bricks because those are called foundation models very specifically. And then magic happens, math happens really, and you get an output, a document or an email or some kind of a response, whatever that might look like. And that's really great. But in order to get the most accurate and up-to-date information possible, one additional step that you have to do is actually layer on top your own specialized database. It's actually something called a vector database, which you don't have to worry about too much. But that database is going to contain that up-to-date information, that accurate information that you want. And now the new pathway that happens is you type in your prompt. When you type in the prompt, the first thing that we're going to do is go check that database for whatever information is relevant inside of it. We're then going to pass it back to the prompt. It's going to be augmented to it. And then after that, it's going to go through the same pipeline we had before to generate the new output. So first we retrieve, then we augment, and then we generate. And that's what retrieval augmented generation is. And that can be really, really valuable for whatever you and your team need to put together. So Azure AI Foundry is a tool that helps make that a little bit more possible for your organization and a pretty easy way to do it. So I'm going to pass over to Matt in a second, and Matt's going to talk through both retrieval augmented generation and a close cousin of that called AI search. And those tools are tools that you can take advantage of inside of Azure AI Foundry to really push forward your work as it comes to large language models. So Matt, I'll pass it over to you from here.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, let me take this off. All right, so again, my name is Matt, and I'm going to give you this demo for Azure AI Search. First, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what it is. So this is a tool that lets you search across a lot of different sources of data all at once. Allows you to kind of categorize it. And instead of having to manually open each item and kind of search through all the different pieces of data to try to find individual items, you can use plain English and instantly get the answers and the exact source of the data that you want with a little bit of context. For our specific example, kind of like we've been talking about, we're going to use documents that are related to securing funding and managing like grant compliance information. And so maybe while you're trying to juggle multiple different grant opportunities at once, this is going to be a huge time saver. So the first element of this process that I'm going to show you is where the data is stored. So you can see right here, this is Azure Storage, and you can kind of see several different documents here, PDF documents. It doesn't necessarily have to just be PDF documents. It can be web pages, emails, chat logs, databases, all sorts of different sources of data, pretty much anything that you could possibly need to kind of aggregate and sort through data and find something easily. For our specific example, I'm going to pull open one of these. We're going to show you a PDF document that's related to a specific grant application. So this is for a Merck grant application where it has guidelines, detailed budget rules, and proposal requirements. And for our purposes, I kind of want to show you before and after how this operates like in an old world scenario. We want to find Merck's maximum admin overhead limit. I'm told that's a pretty common thing for grant requirements. And you can see I'm going to search for words like overhead. I'm not going to come up with anything. I'm going to search for administrative. Like these are things that you might try to search as you're manually going through this, and it's kind of coming up with nothing. This is kind of the purpose of the before and after. So again, we're going to then show you the new world scenario where we're going to be able to kind of use this service to go through and do that a lot easier. The first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to have to pick a model. Ryan had talked about these in the demo. And so these are pre-built. The Azure has these already provided for you, and I'm sure you guys have heard of lots of these. There's a lot of different ones out there, but you kind of get some built in. And these are what it's going to use to extract key information like names and dates and topics from this information. It has the ability to use semantic understanding and context and meaning to kind of influence how it's going to search through this and really help you kind of find those in-between items that are going to be difficult to find otherwise. And it's going to summarize and translate it in ways that are understandable. So I'm going to move on to AI search. This is the actual engine. It's going to use that model. So these are the tools that actually go through and organize the data so it can be searched efficiently. So it's kind of like having a table of contents or a searchable catalog for your data. It stores all of that processed information in a way that makes it easy to retrieve. It reads your raw data and applies those models to it, and it builds an index so that you can then use it to do your operations. So the last piece that I'm going to show is kind of where we pull all of this together, and this is the chat playground. This is the interface where you can start asking the questions and you can kind of use your natural language. The AI is going to respond using the data that you've collected and indexed. It's kind of like having that super smart assistant that you have that uses all these moving parts to get the information that you need. So like before, we're kind of looking for that overhead cost for Merck's grant. I think you can kind of see in the lower left-hand corner, that's where we've kind of added all those moving parts to this single interface so that it can use that model and it can use that indexer and it can use our data files all down there. Once we have all the pieces lined up and we're ready to go, then we can use that plain language to start asking this questions. So yeah, I'm going to just ask a simple question. You can kind of see my instructions there. You kind of want to use detailed instructions. This is kind of the piece where I would say you can kind of pivot. When you start searching and parsing through your documents and you maybe don't get exactly what you're looking for, this is kind of like that prompt that you see with ChatGPT and things like that. You can continually modify this and refine this, but you can get super specific, especially when we're talking about things like these grant applications. You're going to have some requirements that you know are going to really influence what kind of answers you get back. And so that's going to be a really powerful piece of this tool, is to be able to kind of adjust that on the fly. You can see here, I even added in things like tone and clarity. Like I told it not to be a bureaucratic reader. It's really just super plain language that you can use to influence what results you get. So the first question that I'm going to ask this is just a simple, straightforward, like, tell me what you can do. Now that we've built in all of this information, and we're going to ask for that specific item, the Merck overhead. And I'll kind of show you, you can see that it put it in parentheses there. The actual term that we could have searched for would be indirect cost. And that's just that's the spoiler alert, right? Telling you exactly what you could have searched for if you had known what to look for. But again, it has that context, it has that information both from our instructions, but also just kind of understanding how this operates to be able to get you the information that you need. So the next thing that we're going to ask for, we don't have to stop here. We can add more questions about multiple different documents. I'm going to ask about whether we need to submit a letter of interest for a specific grant. And again, it doesn't need to know specifically what document, where it is. It's indexed and cataloged, absolutely everything. And it's going to give us those reference points in case you need to go in and pull more information specifically related to that. Super helpful. And I'm going to pop in a couple more just to kind of show how you can cycle through these. And then I'll finish up by showing you one last thing. So for this item, we're asking about funding, again, for a specific grant. How much can we request? You can see in this example that we have 2 citations. So again, it kind of just shows you how broad this can go. The last thing I like to just kind of quickly point out, it's a little outside of the scope, but you can see the menu that I'm going right there. It shows you ways that you can deploy this for other people to use. One of those is Teams apps. Once you kind of have this foundational tool in place, it can be super powerful to deploy it to other people on your team and enable other folks to be able to get the same kind of data insights as you. Well, that's it. Back to Ryan.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt. And also, want to call out, I saw some comments in the chat of these feel like they can be somewhat complicated looking tools, and that's totally fair. There are certainly an array of tools that you might think about using that would help you do this work. I think a good starting place if you're a smaller organization trying to think about how to do this is just simply, particularly on the on the side of generative AI, just understanding what you can do with Copilot is really, really helpful. That's like the baseline starting point that you're in a Microsoft environment. That's where you should be working from. And Copilot, of course, is integrated across the different types of tools that you're using. If you're starting to look for more advanced things, that's where something like Azure AI Foundry would come into play. On the analytics side, some of what we talked about earlier, we talked more about the predictive types of work, thinking about what you might want to do with a system like Fabric that offers a lot for you. A step before that you might think about is something like Power BI, which can be complicated in its own right. I don't want to diminish that, but that could be a really good starting point if you're trying to get your data into one place, if you're trying to tell the story of the descriptive analytics for your work, and then you can grow into some of the other tools from there. So this is what's possible, but that doesn't mean there aren't other tools that you can use besides that to push your work forward a little bit. And there's lots of stepping stones along the way you might think about. So it's a great comment, and I'm glad someone brought that up. We're going to push it forward a little bit. Once again, what we talked about here with Matt in this demo is thinking a lot more about how to do AI search and retrieve additional up-to-date information using RAG as part of your AI. But there's also this idea of agents that we want to make sure that we talk about. And if you've paid attention to recent news, there is a lot going on with agents. And so the equivalent for large language models of that prescriptive task, how do I take a prediction, how do I take my analytics and then action upon it, is the idea of an agent. And agents are a very, very broad term. The definition that I've seen going around is that it is anything that perceives its environment and then acts upon it, which you'll note is very broad, but comes across in a few particular ways here. It's actually an old definition. So the idea of agents, while it's become really popular in 2025, it actually goes all the way back to 1995. So it's a concept that's existed for a really long time. It's just that we're seeing it come to fruition today. The way that I like to think about agents is actually the same way that you might think about a square versus a rectangle. You might not remember this definition, but maybe if you have a fourth grade student, they might have learned this recently. If you recall, the relationship between a square and a rectangle is that a square is always a rectangle, but a rectangle is not always a square. They have kind of a tension between each other. It has to do with those four sides and four corners at 90-degree angles, right? Agents and automation have a similar relationship to each other. So agents are a form of automation, but not all automation are agents. And the particular way that I think about that are that agents allow for non-deterministic automation, whereas the typical automation that you might think about in your organization is more deterministic. So the way you might think about that is deterministic just means if then. If this form comes in, then I'm going to go classify it as this. If this form comes in, I'll send an email to this person. It's very like one-to-one. And that can be great, but that also means that you're limited in terms of what you can do. There are some types of automation that you might ask a person on your team to do that they need to use a little bit more nuanced understanding. It might be non-deterministic, where you can't totally account for all the different eventualities. And that's where an agent using AI would come into play. And that's really, really valuable. Just to give you a sense of what some of those things might be, I'm going to rate them from simple to advanced types of concepts, and I'll give you an example of each. Once again, these are going to be in the realm of the world of fundraising, so we'll work from there. The most simple version you might think about are retrieval-based examples. A good example here is, let's say that you wanted to build a chatbot that's aware of donor information and can answer questions for team members. So the idea here is you have a data store of all the information about the donors that you're working with, and you want to make it easy for someone on your team who might interface with them to pull up all their information. Another example, something that we did at Tech Impact actually, I'm guessing a bunch of you have like HR documentation and team manuals and all those, your benefits information, all that kind of stuff. And if you're big enough to have an HR team, or if you're the person who's getting to play as HR, that might drive you batty. You've got to answer all those questions pretty frequently. So instead, you might build an agent that can just go retrieve that. Something that's more task-based is really where I see the value here. And that's, in this case, let's say you wanted to automate the generation of a donor thank you letter based upon the most recent donation and referencing how that organization, how that person has engaged with the organization. So right now that might require a donor manager to be able to do that, someone who has that knowledge, but you're storing that data in other systems that you have. So instead of having the very plain, thank you for your donation of $50, we really appreciate you. What if you were able to tailor that to the specific knowledge that you have about that person and automate that process? And something more autonomous would be something that's happening in the background all the time. So it's kind of constantly looking around for, okay, here are lapsed donors. What can I do to re-engage them? And how do I personalize that outreach to them? It's happening in the background. There's no particular trigger that's happening to make that occur. There are a lot of different ways you could think about agents in your organization. I'm pulling this from the Microsoft Nonprofit Summit that happened back in March, as they were talking about some of this. And this outlines some of the different places across an organization, both for-profit and nonprofit, where agents might have value. But the way I'd want you to think about it, agentic tasks are the type of tasks that you might need to describe to a person how to do it. You're almost telling an intern like, hey, this is how we need to do this. And then they're going to be off and running and executing it. Agents are something very similar. At Tech Impact, one way that we've done this is actually through a tool that we have called a nonprofit policy builder. Like I said, we're a nonprofit that likes to help other nonprofits use technology effectively. And while the least sexy thing you can possibly do is building a computer use policy, it's also one of the more important things that an organization could do to protect itself and to help tell the people that work for them how they should be responsibly using their technology at their organization. Now, this is a service that we've had for a long time. And as part of that service, so this is before agents, what we would typically do, we had some templates that we would work from, but we had as an organization would say, hey, I want to do this. We'd have a consulting meeting to understand what their needs are. We had a template that we would give people in Excel. And when we gave them that template, they went and filled it out as best as they could. And it would take that organization some time to do. And sometimes they'd also have to come back to us with some questions about how to respond to those things. And so that would take us a little bit of time too. From there, our consultants would draft a policy for them. And like I said, we would have some templates here, but your organization, you're different from other organizations. The needs of a food bank in California are going to look really different from a legal aid society in Connecticut, which are going to look really different from the needs of a direct services organization in Delaware. The templates only go so far. And so that would mean that our consultant would have to do some research to go update things. It would take them some time. There's minutia of difference across these. And then finally, we'd have to schedule a meeting to deliver to the organization. And so let's say in total, that took us like 2 to 5 hours of work time. But also in terms of the literal time elapsed, this could be a few weeks just to get those meetings on the calendar. You know how long it takes to get some of this stuff scheduled. And so that wouldn't let us serve and meet our mission in the way that we really wanted to. So with the idea of what if we made this an agent? Part of making it an agent actually had just as much to do with us thinking about how to adjust the process to deliver it more effectively as it did with anything else. So some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, it's not necessarily agents. There is a key piece here where it is, but it's actually a process improvement process. So first, we decided to flip things on its head. We decided to invest in making some educational content that would teach people about the different parts of a computer use policy and how to think about it. From there, once they finish going through that educational content, they would get a link to a Qualtrics survey. Now, using Qualtrics over Excel is a trade-off. That's a tool that we have to pay for, but the flip side of it is that we can really control how people work through it, and we can embed some additional information, and we can also make sure that they're only filling out the things that we want to fill out. The second that they hit enter on the Qualtrics survey, it gets sent to Microsoft, and as part of that, we use an agent to take the information that we know about them, what they asked us to review as part of that Qualtrics survey, and automatically convert it into a template for them, or convert it into a policy for them. We actually deliver 2 separate documents for them. The first one is an updated policy, and the second one is actually telling them how we change the policy. It's like a meta document, so that they can use that for their records and make changes as need be. We always encourage folks to review it and make sure it's correct for them, but it gives them a really, really strong starting point. And that all happens immediately. So some numbers for you. Every time someone fills one of those out, it costs us about 97 cents. And they typically, after they hit submit, they get the response back to them in about 3 minutes. And if they need some optional consulting, it helps a lot. So it dramatically reduced the time that our team has to spend on it. It dramatically reduced the amount of back and forth we needed with organizations. And it also dramatically increased the number of organizations who complete this. So just for the record, we launched this back in about March. And so far, about 120 organizations have completed this, which is higher than what we've done before. So using an agent, one, saves us resources, while also dramatically making this easier for organizations to get the tools that they need. It lets us meet our mission more effectively. In terms of categorizing this, I would call this a task-based agent because it operates on a trigger. When someone hits submit on Qualtrics, it automatically is listening for that and automatically makes it happen. And if this is something that your organization is interested in doing for yourselves, or like just want to be inspired by and think about, you'll get the deck, so you'll be able to see this. You can try it for free at techimpact.org/policy builder. Whether you don't have a computer use policy today, at which point you definitely need one, or if you do have a computer use policy and you just want to update it, it'll work for both of those use cases. So let's think about a different version of this. I'm going to pass it back to Matt. We're going to think back to one of those same types of tasks related to fundraising, and we're going to show you how you might build something like that using Azure AI Foundry with agentic AI. So Matt, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Ryan. Okay, so agentic AI, super amazing service to be able to use. Waiting for it to start here. There it goes. All right. So this is a little bit of a step up from the prior Azure AI search. Azure AI search is going to be kind of the mechanics of the search itself, where Foundry kind of takes to the next level where you're actually going to be able to take some action based on that information. It does a lot of the same things, but then you can kind of build in extra functionality to send emails and do all sorts of really cool automation attached to your actual AI search. There's a pretty wide ocean on what you can actually design agentic functionality to be able to do. I'm going to give you a pretty straightforward demo of exactly how you can use this. We're going to go right back into our agent playground, and we're going to use one of those scenarios that Ryan was actually just talking about related to sending thank you letters, customized thank you letters to constituents and donors. Just waiting, is this actually progressing? Yes, it is. Okay. So this is the agent playground that we were in. And we're going to go through a couple of different elements here so that you can see the different moving parts. You can see I have the name. I named my agent. You can see that same GPT-4, and we classify the model that we want to use on the right side there, automatically included with Azure. Again, we have some pretty detailed instructions that we're going to go through. We specify a whole bunch of different stuff, like what types of pieces of information we want to go into our thank you letters, what things we care about. And again, you can add things like tone. That item down there that you can see is the knowledge. That's kind of like before where we were adding our file. I like to call this piece out because this is especially useful for folks that have like CRM systems that maybe don't have any AI functionality built into. It's going to be a pretty common practice to export all of your donor data into a single file that then you could feed into something like this to do some really cool stuff. And that's exactly what this file is it's just a giant file of all sorts of different donor data that we might want to use to get customized thank you letters. So again, one of the factors that we have called out is like whether people have opted out, and so maybe they don't even want to get thank you emails. We can do specific time ranges, specific amounts. We can really get super granular with the criteria that we want to do. And you can see there, I'm kind of calling out the opt-out and different factors that you might do there. Now, since this is a demo, I don't want it actually to send out any emails to folks. So I specify in here that I want it to send emails just to me, but I am still going to tell it I want to use all this donor data. I want customized names and organizations and things like that that they can actually, that we can see in our thank you letters. Another item we saw, through testing is it was sending it more than once. So that's a criteria you can throw in there is please, make sure you only send it once. You can add some criteria like, print it out on the screen and show me what these thank yous are going to look like before you actually send it. There's a lot of control that you can add in here without having to do anything super complex. Again, you're just using plain language to kind of dictate exactly how you want it to operate. And these are the kind of back and forth testing that you can do with something like this. Another item I added in here is like some HTML spacing that I wanted to use in my thank you letters, just to make sure that it was going to go through and produce a good result. I keep having to check to see if it's actually moving. Is it frozen? There we go. Okay, sorry. There we go. It's moving. Sorry about that. So one of the first things that I will end up asking it here, you can see that address, it was frozen there for a second. I apologize, folks. So I'm specifying that I wanted to send the emails to me. Again, like I mentioned, I don't want to accidentally send out test emails to people while I'm kind of exploring this. And there's that item where we want to only send it once per donor. But one of the first questions that we're going to end up asking it here is just to see who all donated in July of 2025. Move it forward a bit here. Sorry, I'm just getting past where it was held up. So I'm asking it what it can do for me. Because again, if this is an agent, we're intending other people to be able to use it. So you can see it's kind of giving me a little bit of a description here, how it's analyzing donor data. It's going to eventually do thank you emails, and it's going to give us donation summaries. So it's kind of built into our instructions to give a lot of different information to help us kind of make sure that these thank you letters go out exactly how we want and make sure that it's targeting the right people. So again, the first thing that I'm going to ask it for is that see who has donated in July 2025. And I really like to point out when you see this data, how specific it's going to get. It's going to specifically call out like people that have opted out. Really seems to be struggling here. So I'm going to skip. Yeah, so you can see folks that have opted out. And it kind of goes through and shows us all of the different pieces of information that it's going to send out. So the next task will be to actually ask it to send out some of this information. I'm going to I think we're getting close to time, so I'm going to skip a little bit. Once we verify the information, looks accurate, we can actually add the prompt to send out a specific type of email to someone. You can see here where I ask it to draft personalized emails focused on these donors. And I specifically say to exclude people that have opted out. It's going to go through and kind of give us a preview and show us where everything is. And then again, it's asking us at the end to kind of confirm before we actually send it out so that we can kind of sanity check some of these. I keep scooching along. And then I go ahead and tell it to send away. You can see in the lower right-hand corner under knowledge and actions, the action is the piece where it actually can send stuff out. That's where it has the email set up. And it takes it just a second, and then it gives kind of a summary. It tells us who it emailed to. You can see that email agent in the lower right-hand corner there. I'm going to scooch forward to where I actually show you the email. And you can see here, it did go to me, but specifically it's calling out Jane, the campaign that Jane was in, the amount, and then it also has customized tagline for our company. So again, kind of similar to the other one. I know sometimes this looks a little bit complex, but it's got a lot of this baked in and included, ready for you to go. It just takes a little bit of playing around with it. All right, that's it. Thanks, Ryan.
Cool. Thanks so much, Matt. And just to highlight again, so the value of this, sometimes it might look like this is just the same type of prompting that you would typically do, hey, help me write an email, but the value of agents is that it's automating it. So in this case, that automation pipeline would look something like, when a new donation comes through, I want you to automatically write an email. Also, really importantly, we're going to connect that to some knowledge that we have, similar to RAG, so some information about that person and about their donation amount. And then a thing that I love that's a good practice here is that it kept the human in the loop. So it asked Matt to confirm that we wanted to send this, and that can be really valuable. With the policy builder, just to give you a sense there, when we first deployed that agent, we actually did the same thing. Before we sent it out to anybody, we would go read every single policy, make sure that we felt good about it. And it was only once we felt comfortable with it that we made the decision of we could just automate the whole process and would go all the way through. So if you're thinking about using AI to automate some of your work with agents, that's something that you might want to consider about too. Where do you want a human to have review to make sure that you get the best outputs possible? So that covers a lot in terms of the art of the possible. What are the things you could do? We talked about predictive analytics and some of the things you could do there. We talked about AI and some of the things you could do there. I want to contextualize this now just in terms of a data strategy as we're thinking about wrapping up. So the next question that we're going to spend most of next week thinking about is, cool, now that we know what's possible, how can we make this possible? And data strategies are the key to making that happen. There are a lot of different versions. If you were to go look this up on your own that you might find in terms of what it looks like to build a data strategy. Here's how we think about it though. And if you're bringing this back to your organization, this is how I'd encourage you to think about it as well. And everything really starts with understanding your goals. So what are the things that really matter to you and your organization? I mentioned earlier that you might think about the data work you want to do in terms of the logic model or theory of change, or certainly the mission that you have. So just like any other type of strategy work you might do, when you're building a data strategy, the first step is to understand those things and make sure any goals that you have align there. This is going to let you figure out what are the highest leverage opportunities that you might want to use data to help you with. Maybe you're the type of organization where actually it'd be a huge value boost to you to be able to predict the likelihood of someone making it through your program. Maybe it's not as valuable, but whatever it is that's going to let you figure those things out by asking those key questions about the different types of analytics that exist. It's also going to let you align upon your KPIs. The next step after you define your goals is you have to get a good understanding of what you even currently have. Data is the absolute ultimate arbiter of the phrase garbage in, garbage out. If the data that you're collecting today sucks, your analytics are going to suck on the back end. There's no way around it. It's just going to amplify the garbage that you have. And the best way that we think about doing that is to actually inventory your data sources and understand what's going on with them and what the gaps are that exist. And that really means going into the systems very specifically. You're also going to want to understand how those data sources might even connect with each other. It's not enough to have each data source living in its own silo. They have to talk to each other in some way, shape, or form so that you can make some of this work happen. Governance is a big piece here as well. We're going to spend some time next week talking about that. Governance is the process by which you manage your data at your organization. That certainly looks different at a very small organization versus a very large one. But every single organization needs to have an understanding of what governance should look like. And now that you have those gaps, you can solve for those problems. You might need to understand the tools you need for the job, understanding what you have today, and based upon those gaps you identified in your data audit, what you're going to need tomorrow. The different types of tools you need are going to be dictated by your ultimate goals. Then, of course, you can build out an implementation plan based upon the impact and effort and feasibility of those different items so you can budget appropriately. Sometimes the work you're doing is stuff that you can fit into your budget today, and that's awesome. Sometimes the work that you need to do might require some grant funding, one-time grant funding for implementation, but then longer-term funding in some way to be able to pay for licensure costs or maintenance costs but you need to have a really good understanding of what that looks like so that you can place your bets accordingly. Your team members are going to need skills. So you might not have all of the data skills in your team today that you need. So how are you going to build those? And who needs to have what skills? At a minimum, everyone should really have some level of data literacy, an understanding of how to use data to make decisions. And then you have to build a culture to help you with this. Data literacy only goes so far as your organization has a culture of data-driven decision-making. How are you as a leader going to model that? How are you going to ask the people on your team to use that in their day-to-day work? And what's really important there for you? And last, we can't skip evaluation. So whatever work you're doing to build a data strategy, you're going to want to make sure that those KPIs that you set for yourself are coming to fruition and you're tracking your outcomes towards it. You're going to want to consider both qualitative and quantitative outcomes. So it's not just about like, did we hit the numbers, but it's what are the stories around these numbers that we hit? And then you have to understand a cycle of continuous improvement for yourself. How are you going to keep pushing yourself forward? And truly the last thing to understand as part of this is how all of this work fits into the idea of a data lifecycle. We're going to center our conversation next week on this data lifecycle. So this we'll refresh you next week when you come, but this graphic we're going to show right now is really important to this. In the data lifecycle, we really focused on step 3 today. We talked about the analytics piece, but you have to understand, how do you generate the data? How do you store it? How do you get the data where it needs to go through extraction, transformation, and loading? And the different tools that we talked about today and that we're going to talk about next week are going to help make that possible for you. So for example, we talked about Azure AI Foundry. That's really a tool that's going to help you on the analytics side of things. Whereas something like Microsoft Fabric, today we really concentrated on the analytics part, but it's actually also a tool that will help you with that step 2 around storage and then extraction, transformation, and loading. Next week, we'll talk about Microsoft Synapse, and excuse me, it should say Synapse there. That is another tool that is similarly powerful, that gives you some more control, that is also going to allow you to do those things. And the final piece that we'll talk about next week gets to governance, and that's something called Microsoft Purview. And Microsoft Purview is a tool that sits on top of the rest of things to make sure that you are governing and managing your data effectively as part of that data strategy that you might build for yourself. So just to put it all together, and I know we're going to have a couple minutes for questions here, there are a lot of different analyses that are possible for you to perform. Everything from descriptive analytics to prescriptive analytics to generative AI, all of which might be valuable for your organization to think about. You should think about how to build yourself up to those things. Have a good understanding of the descriptive analyses you want to do, which are getting an understanding of your past and the data around it, to diagnostic, starting to ask questions about how data relates to each other, predictive, allowing you to predict the future, and prescriptive, allowing you to action on it, and then generative ultimately so that you can use it for productivity purposes and automation in a non-deterministic way. Once you understand what's possible, now you can start using that to actually build a data strategy that's going to allow you to advance your mission by optimizing your resources, by building trust, and doing all those types of things that we talk about. And last, you might consider these different Microsoft tools to help you do that. Even if you today don't have those skill sets internal to your organization, just by investing in the Microsoft stack, you're going to build your capacity to do this work over time as your team learns more about how to make that possible. So happy to spend the last about 5 or 6 minutes here answering any questions you have, though I've really appreciated the questions we've gotten in chat as we've been going. And thank you all for sticking with us. So we'll take a look in chat. If you've got a question, please feel free to pass it there. And I'm realizing I wasn't looking at the Q&A tab. I think there might be, nope, never mind. No questions there.
There was a couple in Q&A. I think we got to what was in chat for the most part. I'm not sure if it's viewable to everybody on the panel, but also given the time constraints we have, I got one from Jennifer and one from Jill. And if you could just even speak to these very kind of high level, and we could certainly follow up with additional details from Jennifer. Can you discuss safety and security of the nonprofit's data? data in Fabric being used elsewhere or only within the organization?
Yeah,
And if you covered, yeah, please.
Yep, and I do see when I clicked into QA at first, it didn't show me any questions, but they're showing up now. I don't know what's up with that, but here we are. So yeah, Jennifer, really phenomenal question. The data that, or any data you're using with Fabric would all be inside of your Azure environment, which would all be protected as part of your organization. So there are always safety concerns no matter what, and it's great. That's like what the governance piece talks about. But in terms of like your data just by default being made public to other people, that is not a concern that you should have. Rather, the concerns you should have are the training for your own staff around how to be thoughtful about the security about your data, the policies and permissions you're putting into place. But as long as you're kind of following best practices there, you shouldn't worry about data leakage from that perspective. Darnesh, you being the actual data engineer here, is there anything you would add to my thoughts around that?
No, Ryan, you covered it.
Awesome. And then Jill, definitely appreciate your question around just, so the question for other folks who might not see it, how are you addressing the current political climate where DEI grants are gone, people have less money to give, et cetera? That's a great question. I don't have an easy answer for you on that. What I can tell you is that investing in data resources just in general oftentimes does allow you to do more with less. There's an investment in making that happen, which can be a challenging decision to make, but it can allow you to automate some things that maybe you weren't automating before, so that you can still meet some of the same things that you were looking for. I recognize that we feel this too. We're a nonprofit ourselves. We have these challenges. The grant environment and the broader political climate can be challenging for these things, and we recognize that, but are still even more invested from that perspective in using data tools to help make it feasible. I wish I had a better answer for you, just selfishly for myself, but that's the way that we're thinking about it here at Tech Impact. Any other questions outside of those?
Yeah, again, I think we covered, and I know we're getting close to time here. I think we covered most, if not everything that was within the chat. I'd followed up actually with a couple of people already. So we're good there. Somebody about part 2. If you can go forward in the slide. So an invitation to our second session on the 14th, along with the recording and the slide deck, is going to be arriving to those who had registered in the coming days. To learn more about Microsoft AI and the digital skill building, we do have a dedicated page stood up for that. Definitely recommend taking a quick look at that. If there's additional questions regarding Microsoft solutions, we can, of course, be emailed at reachus@techsoup.org. If you have questions for the Tech Impact team, there's also an email address, training@techimpact.org, that you could reach out to us at. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of tie everything off here. I want to thank everybody again for attending. I want to thank the entire team from Tech Impact. I love this topic. We personally feel, especially on the Microsoft program team, that there's a lot of untapped resources here. We understand that there's a bit to unpack, as some of you have identified and highlighted. And that's what we're here also for, to fit into this all together, is to be able to identify and right size even the appropriate Azure AI and or Microsoft 365 solution to your tenant. And to that end, of course, please, again, feel free to email us at reachus@techsoup.org. And of course, please join us for part 2 of this session on the 14th of October. So with that, again, I will add a third or fourth or maybe even a fifth thank you to the folks at Tech Impact. Ryan, Matt, Darnesh, that is greatly appreciated. I love the topic, and thank you all for joining, and we look forward to welcoming you back on the 14th.
Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to see you next week.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.